Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to get hands-on with creating some custom classes. As you can see in this architecture diagram, there are some classes we have to create, namely the card model class and the card class. We're also going to create a custom collection view cell by subclassing the original UI collection view cell class so that we can add some custom functionality to this cell. All right, let's dive into Xcode and get started. So we're going to start by creating a brand new Swift file in our project. Over here in the File Navigator, go ahead and right-click on this group and choose New File. Then we're going to choose Swift File over here under iOS. Click Next. And we're going to call this guy the card model. Now, the target should be checked on by default. If it's not, just make sure it's checked so that this file gets included into this target. I'll go ahead and create that file. It's going to add it to the bottom of the File Navigator list, but I usually like to just drag it at the top. And in the next module, I'll also show you how to, once we get more of these files and it starts becoming a little confusing, I'll show you how to create different groups and how to organize your files. All right, so we've got our card model class here. Well, actually, it's just an empty Swift file for now, but we're going to use this file to create our card model class. So go ahead, type the class keyword, and let's call this guy card model. And if you can't remember the syntax, refer to your Swift cheat sheet. Now in this card model, I am going to declare one method right now, and I'm going to call it getCards. All right, now this method is going to be called by the view controller to get a set of cards from the card model. This method is actually going to generate the cards. So there will be a return value, but I don't want to specify it just yet because I want to show you what we're actually going to be returning. So let's leave out the return value just for a second here, and I'm going to write some comments inside the method here, outlining the steps that we're going to do in this method. And this is a good practice to just get your thoughts down first, and then fill in the code later. This is called writing pseudocode. So let's start by, we're gonna declare an empty array to store all the cards, right? And then we're going to randomly generate 8 pairs of cards. And then finally, we're going to randomize the cards within the array. And then we're going to return the array. So that's the gist of our method right there. Now let's go back to the return value. What is it that we're going to return? Well, I mentioned that we're declaring an array, we're going to generate cards and then return the array, right? So you know that the return value is going to be an array. But what is it going to be an array of? Now, I could just return a list of strings. But remember, for each single card, I have 3 pieces of data that I can think of, at least for right now. I have the image name for that card. I have a Boolean variable dictating whether or not that card has been flipped, and another Boolean variable dictating whether or not that card has been matched. So that's at least 3 pieces of data. So instead, what I want to do is create a separate class to represent a card. And inside that class would have those 3 data items. And so instead of having an array of the data items itself, I'm going to have an array of card objects, and each card object is going to contain those 3 pieces of information. So I'm going to leave this right here as an error, and let's go ahead and create our card class, and then we're going to come back to this method and fill this in and correct that error. So in the File Navigator, let's go to New File again. Let's add another Swift file, and I'm going to call this card. And again, I'm just going to drag it up here. And then down here, let's declare our card class. All right, so here we're going to fill in the properties, just the 3 pieces of information I mentioned to you. So var image name. I'm going to initialize this to an empty string. And this image name is basically going to be the graphic asset name that we have here in our asset library. All right, so going back to this class now, I'm going to write is matched, and this is going to be a Boolean. I'm going to just initialize it to false, and is flipped again, I'm going to initialize it to false. So these are kind of the default values for every single card object that we create. All right, that looks good to me. Let's save it. Let's go back to the card model here. And now I can write in here that we are going to return an array of card objects. All right, so let's fill in the code inside of this getCards method. So here I'm going to declare an empty array. So var, let's call this generated cards. And if you forget how to declare an empty array, you can refer to your cheat sheet. So this is basically how you would do it. You can see that this syntax looks similar to this one, right? That's the data type. The data type is an array that contains card objects. Adding these two brackets over here after that data type just creates a new array object of that data type. All right, so now I'm going to randomly generate 8 pairs of card. The technique I'm going to use is to use a for in loop that runs 8 times, and then in each iteration of those 8 loops, I'm going to create a pair of cards and add it to the array. That way, we guarantee that there are 8 matching pairs, rather than looping 16 times and then randomly creating 16 cards. You're not guaranteed to get matching cards. So let's do for, and because I don't care about the variable, I'm going to use underscore for in, let's do 1 to 8, that's 3 dots, and then you put your curly brackets in there, and inside those curly brackets is the code that is going to loop 8 times. So again, before I write any code, let's just put down some pseudocode to organize our thoughts. We are going to generate a random number. We're going to create a new card object. How about we create 2 new card objects, set their image names, add them to the array. All right, so let's generate a random number. Var random number is equal to, and this is going to be an integer, so I'm going to use int dot random, and the range that we want is actually the range of assets that we have from 1 all the way to 13. So let's go back. So you notice that I'm using these arrows here. These are really handy to navigate forward and backward. 1, 3 dots, 13. So it's gonna grab a number from 1 to 13. So create 2 new card objects. I'm going to say var card1 is equal to card. All right, that's how you create a new card object. And card2 is also a new card object. So just like that, we've created 2 new card objects. We've declared 2 variables to keep track of them. Let's set their image names. So card1 dot image name is equal to, now this is going to depend on what your asset names are. So you'll notice that it is a lowercase c because the capitalization matters. Lowercase c card and then the number 1 to 13. So that's what I'm going to put here. Lowercase card, and then I'm going to insert the random, insert the random number right here, just like that. That's going to substitute this part with whatever number I generated here. All right, so that's setting the image name property for card1. Let's do the same thing for card2 and make sure that you actually type card2. Otherwise, you're going to be setting the image property twice for card1. So make sure you don't do that. Random number. All right, and then finally, we just add them to the array. And an easy way is you can append a sequence, or even better, use the plus equals and then just put card1 and card2 into an array like that, and that's going to append those 2 cards into the array. All right, so let's see what it's saying here. It's basically saying that I should use let instead, which is fine. Xcode is detecting that we haven't modified what's in that variable, so it's trying to make our code more efficient. and telling us to declare it as a constant instead of a variable. All right, let's see what we got here. Same thing here, use let instead of var, great. Okay, so now we can randomize the cards within that array. This used to be pretty hard, but now it's just a method that's really easy to do. It's part of the array class. So type generated cards.shuffle, and that's basically it. And then we return the array using the return keyword, just like that. Now we've got this getCards method that declares a new array, randomly generates 8 pairs of cards, and randomizes the cards within that array and then returns the cards. Now, one thing I will mention, however, is that when we generate a random number 8 times, from a random number from 1 to 13, and we're doing that 8 times, there is a possibility that we might get duplicates. So we might get duplicate pairs. In order to fix this problem, you actually did this exercise back when we introduced loops in Module 2. Now, one of the exercises I showed you was to generate 10 unique numbers and to use a while loop instead of a for in loop because you don't know how many loops you need to get unique numbers. So I'm going to leave that as an exercise or an improvement for you to do. Instead of looping 8 times, you would basically change this into a while loop, and then you would add an if statement here to check if that number was already part of part of your array or not. So that's how you would do that. But I'm going to leave that to you. So we've got our card model here. Let's recap why we need this card model in the first place. Again, it all boils down back to the MVC design pattern, because remember, the model is responsible for the data, which is the card data right here. The view controller is responsible for getting that data and then sending it to the view, and the view is responsible for displaying that data, right? And the view would also capture events, send it back to the view controller. The view controller would process those taps, and in this way, it's very easy to decide where to look when you have an issue. For example, if you have a visual bug and the cards aren't aligned properly, then you know it's going to be in your view and you're going to go into your storyboard and check your constraints. However, if let's say there's something wrong with the app logic, tapping a pair doesn't actually match and cause the cards to go away, you might look in the view controller. If there are pairs of cards that don't match, or you don't end up having 8 perfectly matching pairs, then we might have to revisit the code in the model. So that's why this separation of responsibilities using this MVC design pattern helps us write better code and more maintainable code. All right, now let's try out this code. So we're going to add a print statement right here. Maybe we're just going to print out the random number that was generated. And we are going to call this method from the view controller class, because remember, the view controller is going to grab the cards from the card model. So what we do here inside of the viewController.swift file is we declare a property, let's just call this model, and we're going to create a new instance of the card model class. And then inside the view.load, we are going to say model.getCards. You can see here by calling this method, it's going to return an array of card objects, just like we had programmed in the card model. So we have to keep track of those returned cards somehow. What we're going to do up here is declare another property. Let's call it cards array, and I'm going to declare it as an empty card array right here. But what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to assign the returned cards to this cards array property. So this property is going to be in charge of keeping track of all of those card objects that we get from the model. So when we run our app right now, let's go ahead and do that. It's going to call the view.load method of the view controller, and then we're going to see that console output down here. If you don't get this pane, then you can go up here to hide it and show it. And if yours is only a single window like that, there are buttons down here to open it up. All right, so we're going to give the simulator a little while to boot up, and then we should expect to see all the numbers down here. Now your simulator might boot up in this portrait view, even though we've set it only to landscape, but you know this is actually landscape view because you see this line here that appears at the bottom of the screen. So to flip your simulator, just hold down Command and then hit left or right. And that's going to be what you want to see. So down here you can see the numbers that were generated. You can see we do have some duplicate cards. We actually have quite a few. So we have 2 pairs of card 1, we have 2 pairs of card 4, and 2 pairs of card 9. That's actually a lot of duplicates. So if we run it again, we'll get something different. So here you can get, there's a pair, 2 pairs of 8s and 2 pairs of 3s. So, you know, if you have time as a bonus piece, you can implement that while loop to make sure that all of the pairs generated are unique. And just to give you a little tip, you will probably need a separate array here to keep track of which random numbers have already been generated, just so you can check it to see if the new random number that you generate already exists in your generated cards. All right, so now that we have our card model working, it's returning cards to our view controller, we still have one more class to build, and that is actually a subclass of our collection view cell. Remember how I told you that I wanted to subclass this collection view cell so that we can add some custom functionality to that cell. Things such as fading out the image view, right, when it gets tapped. And we're also going to have that collection view class handle the work to swap and flip the cards when the user taps it. The view controller is going to handle the logic, but the view controller is going to give this collection view cell the command to flip the card, and the actual work of the flipping of the cards and fading the cards and all that stuff is going to be done in this custom class that we create now. So why don't we go ahead and go in the file navigator here, choose new file. And this time, instead of selecting Swift file, we're going to select CodeWithChris class, because this time, instead of creating a brand new class, we want to create a subclass of an existing class in UIKit. And by selecting CodeWithChris class, it gives you this nice drop down where you can select a class. Well, you start typing and then autocomplete will handle the rest for you. So the UI collection view cell class is the one that we want to subclass. And I'm going to give our class a different name here so we don't get confused. I'm going to call it card collection view cell. So just in case you're wondering, we could have selected Swift class or Swift file instead of CodeWithChris class. But the nice thing about choosing CodeWithChris class when you need to subclass an existing UIKit class is that by specifying it this way, sometimes it will generate some existing overridden methods and stubs for you to use for subclasses of whatever class you're trying to subclass. Let me show you what I mean. If I click next and I create, you'll see that this file gets created. This syntax is exactly what I showed you back in Module 2 about how you subclass an existing class. In this particular instance of the UI collection view cell, subclassing this guy doesn't give you any sort of stubs or any overridden methods, but if you look inside the view controller, this is actually a subclass of the UI view controller class, which is the one in UIKit. And when you subclass this guy, you're going to get this piece of code here for overriding the view.load. So there are some benefits when you want to subclass an existing class. I would go ahead and choose CodeWithChris class instead of creating a brand new Swift file and then writing that subclassing code yourself. Let me go ahead and drag this guy up here. And what we're going to do now is we're going to connect the 2 image views for the front of the card and the back of the card and expose them to this class so that we can manipulate those images. Because when the user taps on the card cell, we want to flip it over and we want to do some fading and stuff like that. Now, if I click this card cell and I go into the identity inspector, and that's this guy right here, you can see that the class of this element is UI collection view cell. So because we've created our own custom UI collection view cell subclass, I'm going to specify that here. I'm going to say that this prototype cell is actually a type of our custom subclass. So hit enter. So now that we've set this prototype cell as a type of card collection view cell, why don't we go ahead and create IB outlets for these two image views. So let's go ahead and open Assistant Editor. So if you're using Xcode 10, then you'll see an Assistant Editor button right here. In this Xcode 11 beta, you can still access it from Editor up here, and you can choose this option, Editor and Assistant, and you're going to get the code file on the right. Now, what you want to make sure of is that on the right-hand side, you're seeing card collection view cell class. And the way you do that is just to make sure that you are on automatic, right? But if you don't see it being selectable here under automatic, what you need to do is just select an element inside your card collection view class. So select one of the image views like this. And if you've set the custom class for this cell correctly, when you go under automatic, you should see card collection view cell like that. Remember, if you don't see it, then select one of the image views and try it again. If you still don't see it, then double check that you have correctly set the custom class for that prototype cell to be a card collection view cell. All right, so let me go ahead and open up that Assistant Editor again. Let me select one of these card image views, go to automatic, and let's choose card collection view cell, and then we're going to add these IB outlets. So I'm going to do it from the document outline. I'm going to hold down Control, drag it here, and then I'm going to create this as a front image view, connect it, create a couple of lines space so it makes it a little easier for us to drop the second one there, back image view. And just like that, we have connected the two image views from our storyboard and prototype cell into our custom card collection view cell subclass. All right, so in this lesson, you created a card class, which we're going to use to create card objects. Each card object is going to represent a card, and it's going to store information such as the image for the card, the status of that card, whether it's flipped or not, whether it's matched or not. And furthermore, you created a card model class, which is responsible for creating a randomized list of these card objects and passing it back to the view controller, where we're ultimately going to display it inside the collection view. That's amazing work for such a short amount of time. Now, one piece of advice for learning efficiently, and that is just typing things out, making mistakes, seeing where you went wrong, and correcting them. I just find that there's no way to bypass this part of the learning process. And furthermore, that's how I found it most effective for myself to learn iOS app development and just new things in general. So I highly recommend you follow along, type it out, and make mistakes. And don't be afraid to make mistakes as well. Don't get frustrated that your code isn't compiling or you've got some errors and Xcode is screaming at you, because that's all part of the natural learning process. I hope you're having fun. I'm having a ton of fun. I'll see you in the next lesson.